My name is Erika Hewston, and I have been weaving for 8 years now. I've always been super into fiber-related activities, realistically just crafts in general. But looking back, I definitely gravitated towards the fiber options. My brother actually taught me how to make my first ever friendship bracelet. But my grandmother quickly took over and she taught me how to knit and crochet and quilt and embroider and all that fun stuff. I even used to do those little woven coasters where you just have like those hair tie things that you wove in and out of each other. So I guess realistically I've been weaving a lot longer. But I don't do much of those other things anymore. I still love quilting, and I credit my grandmother greatly for fostering my interest in the fiber arts, and both of my parents for always encouraging me. But the 8 years realistically really started when I transferred my senior year of high school. I ended up taking art classes with Kachina Martin, who you all should definitely check out. She's an incredible fiber artist. She's an amazing woman. She actually has a studio over in the Goggle Center for the Arts. If you ever want to go check out her work, it's fabulous. But she did this module on weaving, and I never looked back. I went home and I put together this ratty looking homemade tapestry loom with scrap wood that I found in the garage, and I just hammered way too many nails into the top and bottom of it. But you know what? It worked, and I just kept weaving and weaving and weaving. And even though I have much nicer options now for looms, I still go back to that loom every now and then when I need an extra area to work. So these are just like a couple pictures of my first weavings that I ever put together. I really just focused on like texture and shapes and playing around. I didn't know too much about it. But they just kind of show you a little bit of where it all began for me. And then I kind of accidentally ended up at Kutztown University for my undergrad, which is a whole nother story, but it ended up becoming truly a blessing where I was able to dive into weaving into a way that I just wouldn't have been able to do at the other school that I was at and the other schools that I had looked into. I didn't even know that you could go to school for weaving. It was like something I had never heard of. I had just done a couple tapestry things in high school that I liked doing, and I thought that's all that it was. But when I transferred in, I stumbled upon these course listings for weaving, and I was so excited. I was like, there can't possibly be an entire class, let alone a whole major centered around this thing that I had just learned about a year ago. And I ended up sitting in on a class one day after I transferred in, and that's when I found out about floor looms. And oh my goodness, my mind was blown. I couldn't even have imagined the things that you could do with weaving at this point in time. And I began taking classes with Michael Raddick as my professor, and I learned all about dyeing fibers and finding color inspiration from places and photos, and he always was like a real stickler about craftsmanship, so I really got to like fine-tune those details when it comes to weaving from the very beginning, which was great. And I learned a lot from him about fine weaving and production. And then after Michael, I got to learn from Elizabeth Quay, who is another incredible fiber artist. And she really took all of those technical skills that I had learned, and she pushed me to think further, to develop meaning and find inspiration beyond just color. And it was under Liz actually where I found like that fringy style of weaving that I use in my wall hangings. But it was also during that time that I really put together this like love for color gradients and just like figuring out how to make these colors interact in a way that visually seemed somewhat seamless. So you can see in these pictures here it's called a warp wrapping on the bottom there. So you just kind of wrap around a piece of paper and you get this color idea in mind of what you want to do before you hit the warping board. So that actually ended up being a bunch of scarves at the end of the day there. And then I have a picture of a tie and a bow tie. The tie isn't hand dyed, but the bow tie is. That's something that I kind of started to play with, and I'm still playing with, is color matching and dyeing my own materials so that I can get like even smoother gradations of color in my work. Back to the wall hangings though, this is the piece that in my mind really just kind of started it all in terms of going after this like texturally immersive style and incorporating the architecture of the wall into the piece in some way. I curated an exhibition for my senior thesis, and I ended up placing this small tapestry along a curve in the wall just because like I had run out of space, and it would have looked nice there, you know, if this curve wasn't there. And I was just like, whatever, we're just gonna put it there. So I put it there, and it just like was this aha moment for me, and it hit me. I'm like, you know, these weavings, they're flexible. Until you put a hanging rod behind them, they can conform to whatever surface you put them on. So I ended up finding this really funky section of wall outside of our weaving studio in the arts building. And I made this weaving here in this picture, and I wanted it to play with that architecture. So as you're walking down this hall, coming from what would be the right side of this image, you would just see those neutrals, those whites and those light tans turning into those blushy pinks. And then as you walk past and you kind of follow this piece and you look back, you just see this like explosion of these rich purples and deep reds coming out of it. And I just really like this idea of being able to play with the architecture. And since making this piece, I have made a few others. I could just kind of call them like corner installation pieces. They can be put in any corner, like your normal, you know, 90-degree angle anywhere, but I don't put anything on the back of them to force them to be in any set structure. So realistically, they can fit anywhere that anybody would ever want to put them, which I think is great. So as they move from location to location, that changes. And these pieces, they're truly where my heart is at when it comes to the wall hangings. I'm always keeping an eye out for new locations that I could play off of. Like I have in my mind right now, I would love to find like an industrial place with like cement gray walls so that I can have, instead of these white neutrals on the ends, I could go from like grays into like pale greens and then have like probably more greens. Who knows? Haven't gotten that far. I just know that I would love to find like an industrial location to put this like really soft, fibrous installation piece into. And this piece really encompasses most of how I work. It's really just heavy stylistically. I want the texture, I want the color, I want it to play with location. I don't often work from a super contextual frame of mind. That being said, I did make two pieces that are premiering in this show that originated from a really contextual place for me, and that is quarantine and fake news. So I'm going to talk about quarantine first, and this piece kind of came about because I was working on pieces for this show during the shutdown, and for a while there you couldn't get access to materials very easily because all of the stores were closed. So unless you were ordering online, you really couldn't get anywhere to see these materials in person, to touch them and feel them beforehand. And it stumped me for a little while because I'm very tactile. I always want to have that feel, you know. So I kind of took this as a little bit of a challenge, you know. Anyone who has a hobby like this, you know, you end up with quite the material stash. So I got to thinking first, I was like, you know, what can I make from just what I have? And then, you know, the contextual element I don't usually work with, I made myself think, well, how can I also make this piece represent the time in which it was made, here in lockdown, during quarantine, during this pandemic? How can I represent like the turmoil, the sadness all these people are feeling, the uncertainty that's going on in the world? So I had more black materials than I had of any other color. And I got to thinking about it, and I was like, you know what, this is actually really lucky and quite fitting. You know, black represents sorrow and grief and the depression that people were just facing at this time. As I was talking to my friends, you know, I had so many friends that were just like struggling, having to stay inside. I'm lucky enough to be okay isolating, I guess. I didn't have to face that too much on my own, but I was just feeling for all of my friends at this time. And it's just a color that also enabled me to create this piece that was just visually heavy, and I think signified the weight of the uncertainty that was going on in everybody's lives. And I wanted also in form and in shape to imply the ups and downs that people were experiencing over and over again. So I incorporated more of these drippy sections in that I had in previous pieces. And this was just like a cool process for me, not only because I was working through an emotional context, which I don't usually do, but it was also an interesting exercise in using materials from my own stash. I think I would like to do that again, maybe make like a smaller collection that focuses on utilizing the materials that I've had for years that I just don't really put into my work very much, whether they're colors I'm not attracted to or they don't really play into the gradients that I usually work from. I think it'd be cool to see what happens if I use these colors that I'm not normally drawn to. And you know what? It would clear out some space in my studio, which would be great too. The other big piece that I made for this show is called Fake News, and it was a little bit of a roller coaster to create. So I don't actually have a finalized photo of it at this time because I just finished it a couple days ago and it doesn't even fit in my studio, as you can see from this work in progress picture. It kind of hangs on the ground. So you just get to look at this work in progress picture for now, and if you want to see it, you're just going to have to step over to the Friedman Gallery and check it out so you can see it in all its glory. So the term fake news has gained some notoriety lately, I feel like, and I don't want to get political. So if we kind of remove that element in itself, the term speaks about something that is really factual, that there is such a thing as quote unquote fake news, which is defined as untrue information presented as news. It is often damaging to the reputation of a person or entity, or it's making money through advertising revenue. So types of fake news include clickbait, propaganda, satire and parody, misleading headings, and manipulation. So I think we can all agree that those things happen. And these are things like stories on Facebook that don't come from credible sources, that have catchy taglines, and the information is just either entirely not true or a very small part of it is true. And during quarantine, I think a lot of people were spending a lot more time on their social media profiles. At least I know that I was. And so as I was doing this, I was just feeling really inundated with all of these uncredible stories, and they were being presented as factual information and news, and I don't consider myself like a great researcher. So going out and going on a hunt after every questionable article that I read just seemed exhausting. And I got overwhelmed with this feeling of, what is even true right now? What's really going on? How am I, as just like a normal citizen, supposed to be able to recognize what stories are true and which ones aren't? So I have these orange plastic bags that I got from the Wall Street Journal in one of my undergrad classes. I had to get a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, and I collected the bags. And I decided that I wanted to make a piece about news. I wanted it to be large. I wanted it to be a full 360 experience, so I needed to make it in some way double-sided, right? To just represent this ubiquitous nature of news in general, whether it's real or it's fake, credible or not. So, anywhere you look, there's going to be ads claiming one thing, articles claiming another. We're living in a society of information overload. So I wanted to work with these bags that the newspapers came in. And the fact that they were orange, and Trump has this relationship with, the color orange, and the current popularity of people just shouting fake news at people, that's kind of just like a little bit of a coincidence. That you can interpret as you wish. But I did decide to do a strip of this orange going up the center on one side of the weavings. And this was because I feel like although we're surrounded by information, I do believe that there is a mainstream pile of stories that gets circulated more frequently. And due to algorithms on social media that promote the most viewed items, I think that these like eye-catching, brightly colored, catchy clickbait stories get passed around more frequently, regardless of their legitimacy or not. So I know Facebook recently started doing their like fact-checking thing, which I know some people find controversial as well, but to me, you know, that's their attempt at thwarting the general populace belief in these quote-unquote fake news stories. And then I also just recently watched the documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, and that explained the algorithms on social media more specifically to like each individual than I had ever heard before. So that was interesting to me because that also kind of told me that this quote unquote mainstream information, you know, the stuff that we all see on our own pages that we think everybody is seeing is actually different for each person. You know, it depends on their activity and what their beliefs are, and that's what plays into their algorithms, so it shows them the news that most closely aligns with their beliefs. So it's interesting to me that even in this like sea of mainstream content that we each are getting like a different view anyway. So it just adds like another layer to this whole like, you know, what is even true? What's even really going on? So fake news for me was just a way of trying to navigate my feelings around this just immense amount of information that I was receiving on a daily basis during the pandemic. So I put in, you know, strips of newspaper, which was also really funny because when I realized I wanted to put newspaper in there, I was like, does the world sell paper newspapers anymore? Like, can I actually find newspaper? Because we've just moved to this like technological age as well. So that was kind of funny. And I honestly, I think it would be hilarious. Someday somebody's going to look and be like, what is this paper in there? But fake news, when you see it in the actual space, is double-sided. So what you see on the sides here, the neutrals mixed with the newspaper, the back is entirely just that. The orange stripe is only on one side. So again, highlighting that, you know, even though there's all this information in the world around us, that there is some sort of this mainstream media that tends to pull out specific certain articles, and you never know. You got to really do a lot more research to figure out what's real and what isn't. So where am I planning on going from here? As I said, I don't usually work super contextual, but those past two pieces that I just showed you guys, those were really interesting for me. So I think that there is probably a little bit of a place in me here to explore some new contextual pieces of art, but the two main things that I think I'm going to try to focus a little bit of time on is finding some more of those architectural sites that I can make specific installations for. And then the ties and bow ties that I showed you guys, I'm like super excited about those right now. I really want to market those towards weddings. I actually have my first set is going to be used in a wedding at the end of this month here, and I cannot wait to see them in action. So those are kind of the things that I'm hoping to focus on as I move on. And if you guys are interested in seeing any more, I post a ton of like work in progress pictures on my Instagram page, which is erika.hewston. Then I have my website, erikahewstontextiles.com. If you want to check me out on any of those things. And then, of course, I have my exhibition over in the Friedman Gallery right now until November 24th. So I'd love it for any of you guys to go over there and check that out and give me any feedback that you have. I'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for coming, guys.